What is that smell? Did they let a stray dog into first class?
Captain Bradley Tate, staring straight down at the only black woman on his plane.
Are you talking to me?
Who else? Now!
She handed him her driver's license. He flicked the card between two fingers.
You people always find a way to crawl in where you don't belong, like roaches.
Then he tore it in half.
Don't speak. When we land, I'm handing you to security like the trash you are.
12 passengers. Dead silence. What this man did not know, what was about to demolish everything he spent 22 years building, was that he just ripped apart the ID of an active FBI special agent. And from the second he opened his mouth, she was already memorizing every word for the case file. 5:45 in the morning, Washington, D.C. suburbs. The kind of quiet where you can hear the coffee machine click off from 2 rooms away. Iris Fletcher sat at her kitchen table with a case file open on her laptop. Redacted pages, surveillance photos, names blacked out with thick federal ink. She scrolled through it one more time, closed the laptop, and locked it inside a slim briefcase with a combination lock. This wasn't a work trip. Her sister had been planning the family reunion in Atlanta for 6 months. Iris had canceled twice already. Not this time. She walked to her bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer. Inside, her FBI credentials, gold badge, photo ID, the embossed seal of the Bureau right there on the leather folio. She picked it up, held it for a second. Then she put it back, grabbed her personal wallet instead, driver's license, 2 credit cards, her Skyline Atlantic loyalty card. That was enough for a weekend with family. It was a decision that took 2 seconds, and she'd replay those 2 seconds over and over for the next 14 days. Her phone buzzed. Nathan Cross, her supervisory special agent. "Fletcher, you better actually relax this weekend. That's an order." She laughed. "Copy that." His voice shifted, warmer. "I mean it. The Coleman case is done because of you. 214 exhibits. You built that wall brick by brick. Take the weekend. Eat your mama's cooking. Come back Monday." She thanked him, hung up, grabbed her carry-on, and walked out the door. The drive to Reagan National was 22 minutes, gospel music on low. A 6-year-old sedan with no vanity plates, no bumper stickers, nothing that said, "Look at me." That was Iris. She didn't announce herself, she never had to. And that's exactly the quality that made her invisible to a man like Bradley Tate. Now let's talk about Bradley Tate. Same morning, Reagan National Airport, Pilot's Lounge. Tate walked in like he owned the building. Silver temples, square jaw, the kind of posture that says, "I've been doing this since before you were born, so don't waste my time." 22 years with Skyline Atlantic, 4 commendations, a framed photo of him shaking hands with the airline's founder hung in the training center hallway. He'd walked past it 1,000 times and never once thought it would come down. His co-pilot, Derek Simmons, was already there. 34 years old, 3 years flying with Tate. Simmons pulled up the flight details on his tablet. "Full flight today. First class is packed, mostly loyalty upgrades." Tate snorted. "Loyalty upgrades. Half the time it's people who don't know the difference between a cocktail napkin and a dinner napkin." Simmons didn't laugh. He shifted in his seat and looked back at his screen. He didn't push back either. He never pushed back with Tate, not because he agreed, because Tate controlled his schedule, his route assignments, and his performance reviews. That's how silence works. It's not always agreement. Sometimes it's survival. But survival has a shelf life, and Simmons's was about to expire. Tate picked up his tablet and scrolled through the first-class manifest. Names, seat numbers, loyalty tiers, special service requests. Everything the airline tracks about every passenger. Everything except one thing. Race. The manifest didn't list race. It didn't need to. Because for Captain Bradley Tate, that was the first thing he checked. Not on the screen, but at the cabin door. 7:15 a.m. Gate B34. The players were all in position. Iris sat near the window, reading a novel, earbuds in. Gate agent Gavin Marsh scanned her boarding pass and said, "Enjoy first class, Miss Fletcher." Same thing he said to every first-class passenger. Cheerful, routine, equal. That one sentence, that ordinary, forgettable sentence, would become evidence. Down the jet bridge, Colleen Moore, lead first-class flight attendant, reviewed her service cart, straightened the champagne flutes, folded the hot towels. An elderly black man boarded early with a cane. Pastor Elton Graves, 72, seat 1C. Behind him, a white woman in a tailored blazer, Teresa Dunlap, corporate attorney, seat 3A. One by one, they filed into the cabin, found their seats, buckled in, settled into the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday morning flight. Nobody knew that in less than 40 minutes, this cabin would become a crime scene, and the man in the cockpit would be the one who made it happen. Iris stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin, slid into seat 2A by the window, and buckled in. She pulled out her novel, something she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. Cream blouse, dark slacks, gold stud earrings. No logos, no designer labels. Nothing that screamed money. Nothing that whispered poverty. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman on a Tuesday morning flight going to see her family. And that was the problem. Because for a man like Bradley Tate, what she looked like was all that mattered. The cockpit door opened. Tate stepped out for his customary first-class cabin greeting. This was his ritual, the walk-through, the handshake, the personal touch. He loved this part. It made him feel like the captain of something bigger than an airplane. Row 1A. White man in a business suit. Tate extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, sir. Beautiful morning to fly." Firm handshake, warm smile. Row 1C. Pastor Elton Graves. Tate glanced at the cane, gave a quick nod, and moved on. No handshake. No words. Row 3A. Teresa Dunlap, laptop already open. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Let us know if you need anything." Another smile, another handshake. Row 4A. A couple in matching Skyline Atlantic jackets. "Hey, loyal customers, love to see it." He practically glowed. Then he reached row 2. Iris looked up from her book. The smile didn't disappear. It tightened, like someone had pulled a string behind his ears. His hand stayed at his side. He didn't extend it. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Iris held up her phone. The digital pass was right there. Her name, seat 2A, first class, platinum tier. He barely looked at it. "Do you have a physical copy?" "No, it's digital." He stared at her for a beat too long. The kind of stare that measures and dismisses in the same breath. Then he turned and walked toward the galley without a word. No welcome, no handshake, no "let us know if you need anything." Every white passenger got a greeting. The 2 black passengers in the cabin got nothing. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns are what build cases. In the galley, Tate pulled Colleen Moore aside, kept his voice low, but not low enough. "The woman in 2A. Did she board with a group? Was she an upgrade?" Colleen checked the system on her tablet, tapped the screen twice. "She's a full fare first-class ticket, Skyline Platinum tier." Full fare, not an upgrade, not a standby, not a mistake. She paid full price for that seat. Tate didn't acknowledge it. Didn't say okay or thanks or never mind. He said 5 words that would follow Colleen Moore into an investigation room 2 weeks later. Keep an eye on her. No reason given, no security concerns cited, no policy referenced. Just keep an eye on her. And Colleen, 15 years of service, trained to respect the chain of command, nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't push back. She just added Iris Fletcher to her mental watch list, like the captain had added her to a category that had nothing to do with aviation security and everything to do with the color of her skin. After takeoff, Colleen began first-class drink service. Row 1A. Champagne. Hot towel. Warm mixed nuts in a ceramic dish. Row 1C. Pastor Graves. Champagne. Hot towel. Nuts. Row 3A. Teresa Dunlap. Champagne. Hot towel. Nuts. Row 4A. The couple. Same service, same speed, same smile. Row 2A. Iris Fletcher. 15 minutes later. 15 minutes after every other first-class passenger had been served, Colleen finally appeared at row 2. No champagne offered. No hot towel. No warm nuts. What can I get you? Sparkling water, please. Colleen brought the water, set it down, moved on. Iris noticed. Of course she noticed. She was trained to notice when something was missing from a pattern. But she didn't say anything. She opened her water. She went back to her book. She told herself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. 40 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign was off. Passengers were settled. The cabin had that quiet cruise altitude hum that makes people feel safe. The cockpit door opened again. Tate walked out. He didn't stop at any other row. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to 2A like a man on a mission. Because he was. He stood over Iris. Close. Too close. His shadow fell across her book. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see a government-issued photo ID. Iris closed her book slowly. Excuse me? A government-issued photo ID. It's a security concern. She looked past him, down the aisle. Every other passenger was reading, sleeping, sipping champagne. Nobody else had been asked for anything. You didn't ask anyone else in this cabin for ID? I'm asking you. The words hung there, flat, final. The kind of sentence that dares you to challenge it and punishes you if you do. Iris knew this moment. She'd lived some version of it 100 times, at traffic stops, at store entrances, at hotel check-in desks, at every doorway where her credentials were invisible and her skin was not. She knew the math. Argue, and she becomes the angry black woman. Comply, and she gives power to a man who doesn't deserve it. There is no right answer. There's only the less dangerous one. She reached into her bag, pulled out her Virginia driver's license, handed it over. Tate took it, held it up to the overhead light like he was inspecting a counterfeit bill. Her photo, her name, her address. Valid, current, matching the boarding pass, matching the manifest. There was nothing wrong with that ID. Nothing expired, nothing altered, nothing suspicious. And then he did it. He held the license between 2 fingers. He looked at her, not at the card, at her. And he tore it in half. Slowly. The laminate cracked. The sound was small and sharp, like a bone breaking under skin. He dropped both pieces onto her tray table. What is that smell? Did they let a stray dog into first class? The same words from the gate, but now with an audience. Now with pieces of her identity sitting on a plastic tray between a sparkling water and a closed novel. You people always find a way to crawl in where you don't belong, like roaches. Then he leaned in, close enough that she could smell his coffee breath. Don't speak. When we land, I'm handing you to security like the trash you are. He straightened up, adjusted his tie, and walked back to the cockpit like he'd just handled a maintenance issue. The cabin was frozen. Pastor Elton Graves sat in one seat with his hands on his knees. His eyes were wet. He'd been black in America for 72 years. He'd been asked to move seats. He'd been searched at gates. He'd been followed through airports. But he'd never seen a captain destroy a passenger's identification in front of an entire cabin and dare her to speak. He said, softly but clearly, "Captain, that woman has done nothing wrong." Tate didn't even turn around. "Sir, this is a security matter. Stay in your seat." Graves shook his head slowly. "I know a security matter when I see one, son. And I know when I don't." Tate kept walking. The cockpit door closed behind him. In seat 3A, Teresa Dunlap lowered her laptop screen. She'd watched the entire thing from 10 feet away. She didn't gasp. She didn't confront Tate. She did something far more dangerous. She opened her phone, started a new note, and began typing. 8:42 a.m. Captain approached 2A, demanded government ID. No other passenger asked. Passenger complied. 8:43 a.m. Captain tore passenger's Virginia DL in half, dropped pieces on tray table. 8:43 a.m. Captain made derogatory remarks, direct quotes, stray dog, roaches, trash. Teresa Dunlap was a corporate litigator. She'd built cases for 20 years. She knew what a contemporaneous record was worth in a courtroom. She didn't know she was building one for an FBI agent. She was just building one for a human being who deserved it. In the cockpit, Derek Simmons had heard everything through the open door. The words, the silence that followed, the sound of laminate tearing. When Tate settled back into his seat, Simmons asked, "Brad, what was that about?" "Handled it." "Handled what? She had a valid ticket." "I said drop it, Derek." Simmons dropped it. His hand stayed on the controls. His mouth stayed shut. But something behind his eyes shifted. The way a man looks when he realizes the person sitting next to him isn't who he thought. And then there was Iris. The cabin moved on. Colleen collected glasses. Passengers returned to their screens. The hum of the engines filled the silence like nothing had happened. Iris opened her novel again. Page 112. She read the same paragraph 4 times. She wasn't reading. She was cataloging. Faces, words, the exact sequence of events, the time on the seatback screen, the position of every witness, the inflection of every syllable. Her right hand rested on her jacket pocket, the one with the 2 halves of her driver's license. 12 years at the Bureau teaches you one thing above everything else. You don't react, you record. You don't explode, you build. And when the time comes, you don't need to raise your voice, because the evidence is louder than anything you could ever say. Iris Fletcher was already building. Flight 1162 touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International at 10:48 a.m. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood up, grabbed their bags, and filed toward the door like it was any other Tuesday. It wasn't. As Iris reached for her carry-on, Colleen Moore appeared at her row, hands clasped, eyes down. "Ma'am, the captain has requested that you remain seated until a supervisor meets you at the gate." Iris looked at her. Not with anger, not with surprise, with the kind of patience that only comes from years of watching people follow bad orders without asking a single question. On what grounds? Colleen blinked. I'm just relaying the message. Iris stood up anyway, pulled her carry-on from the overhead bin, straightened her blazer, and walked off that plane with the same posture she'd boarded with. Back straight, chin level, eyes forward. She didn't rush, she didn't hide. She walked like a woman who had every right to be exactly where she was. Because she did. At the end of the jet bridge, 2 people were waiting. A Skyline Atlantic ground supervisor, mid-40s, sweating through his collar, and an airport security officer with a radio on his hip. The supervisor stepped forward. Miss Fletcher, the captain flagged a concern. We just need to verify your travel documents. Iris stopped. My travel documents were verified at the gate in Washington, scanned and confirmed at 6:02 a.m. Your captain destroyed my state-issued ID mid-flight, so if there's a complaint to file, I'll be filing one, not answering one. The supervisor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The security officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had no idea what was going on. Neither of them did, because the only version of events they'd received came from Bradley Tate, and Tate's version was a lie. Here's what Tate had radioed ahead while the plane was still taxiing. Passenger in 2A, non-compliant, potentially fraudulent boarding credentials, combative when questioned. 3 sentences, 3 lies. Non-compliant. She handed over her ID without hesitation. Potentially fraudulent credentials. Her ticket was a full-fare first-class purchase, scanned and confirmed at the gate. Combative. She never raised her voice, not once. But Tate's report hit the ground crew first, and for a few critical minutes, it was the only story they had. That's how power works. It doesn't need to be right. It just needs to arrive first. Iris was escorted to a small windowless office near the airline's operations center. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a table with 2 chairs. The kind of room designed to make you feel small. She sat down, not because they told her to, because she chose to. They asked for another form of identification. She pulled out her passport. United States of America. Her photo, her name. They ran it through the system. It cleared in 11 seconds. The supervisor stared at his screen, then at her, then back at his screen. Everything checks out. You're free to go. We apologize for the inconvenience. Iris didn't stand up. I'd like the names of every crew member on Flight 1162. I'd like a printed copy of the captain's incident report, and I'd like the direct contact information for your airline's Office of Internal Affairs. The room went quiet. The supervisor looked at the security officer. The security officer looked at the floor. They expected her to be relieved, to say thank you, to walk out and disappear into the terminal like 100 other passengers who'd been mistreated and never said a word. Iris Fletcher was not disappearing. She got to the reunion 3 hours late. Her mother hugged her at the front door. Her sister yelled from the kitchen that the mac and cheese was cold. Her nieces pulled at her hands. Her nephew showed her a new card trick. The house smelled like cornbread and collard greens and 60 years of Sunday dinners. She smiled. She laughed. She ate 2 plates. She didn't tell them what happened. Not yet. That night, after the house went quiet, Iris sat on the edge of the bed in her childhood room. The room still had her high school track trophies on the shelf, a faded poster of Lauryn Hill on the wall. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the 2 halves of her Virginia driver's license, held them together, edge to edge, like she was trying to undo what couldn't be undone. Her hands shook. For the first time all day, they shook. Then she picked up her phone and called Nathan Cross. She told him everything, start to finish. The boarding pass check, the drink delay, the demand, the tear, the words. The silence of 12 passengers. The detention at the gate. The windowless room. All of it. Nathan listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, the silence on his end lasted 5 full seconds. Then he said, "You're filing a formal complaint, and I'm making a phone call." "Nathan, I don't want special treatment because of the badge." "This isn't special treatment, Fletcher. This is a federal employee targeted on a commercial carrier. That enters a different pipeline, and that pilot just made it my business." He hung up. And somewhere between Atlanta and Washington, the machinery of a system much bigger than Bradley Tate started turning. But this time, it wasn't turning against Iris Fletcher. It was turning for her. Monday morning, Skyline Atlantic Headquarters, Dallas, Texas. Lorraine Voss, Vice President of Internal Affairs, walked into her office at 7:15 a.m. with a black coffee and a calendar full of routine compliance reviews. By 7:22, her entire week was destroyed. 2 messages were waiting. The first was a formal passenger complaint filed through the airline's website at 11:46 p.m. Sunday night, submitted by one Iris Fletcher. It was 4 pages long, single-spaced. It included timestamps accurate to the minute, seat numbers, direct quotes, descriptions of crew behavior, a list of witnesses by row, and a scanned image of a torn Virginia driver's license, both halves laid side by side on a flatbed scanner, like evidence in a murder trial. Lorraine had read thousands of passenger complaints. People complained about legroom, cold coffee, delayed flights, rude attendants. They wrote in capital letters and used too many exclamation marks, and half the time they got the flight number wrong. This was not that. This read like a federal deposition, because the woman who wrote it had written hundreds of them. Lorraine set the complaint down, picked up the second message. It was from the FBI. Not an email, not a phone call. A formal letter on Department of Justice letterhead, routed through the FBI's Office of General Counsel, addressed directly to Skyline Atlantic's Legal and Internal Affairs departments. Lorraine read it once. Then she read it again. Then she closed her office door. The letter didn't threaten. It didn't demand. It informed. It stated that Special Agent Iris Fletcher, a 12-year veteran of the Bureau's Criminal Investigative Division, holder of top-secret security clearance, lead case agent on the recently concluded Coleman federal corruption prosecution involving 214 exhibits, had been subjected to discriminatory treatment, verbal abuse, and the destruction of her government-issued identification by a Skyline Atlantic crew member during Flight 1162 on the previous Tuesday. The letter requested the airline's full cooperation with a review. It noted, in the dry, precise language that federal attorneys use when they want you to understand exactly how much trouble you're in without raising their voice, that the incident may fall under federal civil rights statutes, FAA regulations governing crew conduct, and federal law prohibiting the destruction of government-issued identification documents. 3 words changed everything. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Iris Fletcher wasn't a confused passenger who wandered into the wrong cabin. She wasn't a woman with a fake boarding pass. She wasn't someone who needed to be handled or dealt with or handed to security like trash. She was a decorated federal law enforcement officer. She had put people in prison. She had testified before grand juries. She had built cases so airtight that defense attorneys quit before trial. And Bradley Tate had torn up her ID and called her a roach. Lorraine picked up her phone. Direct line to CEO Randall Pruitt. "Randall, we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where a captain with 22 years of service destroyed the personal identification of an FBI special agent in front of a cabin full of witnesses, then filed a false incident report calling her combative and fraudulent." Silence. How bad? If this leaks before we act, and it will leak. The FAA opens its own investigation. The DOJ opens a civil rights review. We're answering congressional inquiries by Thursday and trending on every platform by Friday. More silence. The kind that costs money. Ground Tate. Immediately. Full investigation. I want every second of that flight documented. Every witness. Every piece of paper. Everything. Already started. Lorraine. Who is this agent? 12-year veteran. Criminal Investigative Division. Just closed a major federal corruption case. Top secret clearance. Pruitt exhaled. He picked the wrong passenger. No, Randall. He picked a passenger the same way he's been picking passengers for years. This time, the passenger had a badge. That same afternoon, Bradley Tate's home, a suburb outside Richmond, Virginia. His phone rang. He was in his garage, polishing a set of golf clubs he'd bought himself for his 20th anniversary with the airline. The caller ID said, Skyline Atlantic, Human Resources. Captain Tate, this is Andrea from Employee Relations. I'm calling to inform you that, effective immediately, you've been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal internal investigation. He laughed. Actually laughed. For what? A passenger complaint? Captain Tate, the passenger in question has been identified as a federal law enforcement officer. The Bureau has formally contacted the airline. You are directed to surrender your crew credentials to your local base manager within 24 hours and await further contact from Internal Affairs. The garage went quiet. The golf club hung in his hand like a dead weight. That's not possible. She didn't. I'm not authorized to discuss the details of the investigation, Captain. You'll receive written notification by end of day. Do you have any questions about the administrative leave process? He didn't answer. He was trying to remember her face. Trying to remember if she'd said anything that should have told him. But she hadn't. She'd handed over her ID. She'd said nothing when he tore it apart. She'd sat there in silence while he called her trash. And now he understood what that silence was. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear. It was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Collecting evidence while he was busy collecting his own destruction. Back in Dallas, Lorraine Voss's office. The preliminary investigation file was already growing. She spread it across her conference table, piece by piece. Iris Fletcher's formal complaint, 4 pages, time-stamped, verified against flight records. The FBI's letter. Department of Justice letterhead, no room for interpretation. Tate's incident report, filed from the cockpit during taxi. Non-compliant, potentially fraudulent credentials, combative when questioned. Every word of it contradicted by the boarding gate scan log, which showed a valid full-fare first-class ticket scanned at 6:02 a.m. by gate agent Gavin Marsh. The crew manifest, the cabin service log, showing Iris Fletcher was served last in first class 15 minutes after every other passenger. And the scanned image of the torn driver's license. Before a single witness had been interviewed, the paper trail alone was devastating. Every system the airline relied on, ticketing, boarding, service logs, crew reports, told the same story. Iris Fletcher had done nothing wrong. Bradley Tate had done everything wrong. And he'd documented his own misconduct in a federally regulated incident report. That evening, Colleen Moore's phone rang. She was at home, still in her uniform pants, hadn't even changed yet. The voice on the other end identified themselves as Skyline Atlantic Internal Affairs and informed her that she would be formally interviewed regarding the events of Flight 1162. She hung up, sat on her couch, stared at the wall. She hadn't torn the ID. She hadn't said those words. But she'd heard the captain say, "Keep an eye on her," and she'd obeyed. She'd served Iris last. She'd offered no towel, no nuts, no apology. She'd watched a man tear a woman's identification apart from 10 feet away and then asked the victim to remain seated like she was the problem. Silence has a sound in an investigation file. It sounds like complicity. And then there was Derek Simmons. He didn't wait for the call. He picked up the phone himself, called Lorraine Voss directly. "I was the co-pilot on Flight 1162. I want to provide a voluntary statement." Lorraine asked if he wanted union representation. He said no. He said he wanted this on the record before anyone told him to stay quiet. He described the crew lounge comments, the loyalty upgrades sneer, the directive to Colleen, "Keep an eye on her," the confrontation he heard through the open cockpit door, the tearing sound, and Tate's two-word summary when he sat back down. Handled it. That's what Tate said. Handled it. Like he'd fixed a jammed overhead bin instead of destroying a woman's dignity at 30,000 feet. Simmons had been silent on the plane. He'd kept his hands on the controls and his mouth shut, because Bradley Tate was his captain, and his career was in that man's hands. But silence has a shelf life, and Simmons's expired 48 hours later. Day 3. Skyline Atlantic Headquarters, Conference Room 4B. No windows, one camera, one microphone, a jug of water nobody touched. Iris Fletcher flew back to Dallas on the airline's dime, first class. Nobody asked for her ID this time. She sat across from Lorraine Voss and a court reporter, wore the same blazer from Flight 1162. "Agent Fletcher, take me through the flight from the beginning." She didn't hesitate, didn't say, "I think," or "maybe." She spoke the way she testified in federal court, clear, sequential, and devastating. The selective boarding pass check, the missing handshake, the galley directive, "Keep an eye on her," the drink delay, the ID demand, the tear, the exact words, "stray dog," "roaches," "trash," the detention at the gate, the windowless room in Atlanta. Then she placed a sealed plastic bag on the table. Inside, the two halves of her Virginia driver's license. Lorraine stared at it. "You preserved it." "I put it in my pocket the moment he dropped it. Didn't touch the torn edges. Sealed it Sunday night before filing my complaint." 12 years of bureau training had turned an act of humiliation into Exhibit A. Lorraine looked up. "Agent Fletcher, why didn't you identify yourself as FBI on the plane?" Iris leaned forward. "Because no passenger should have to flash a badge to be treated like a human being. My badge is not my dignity. My ticket was valid. My seat was purchased. That should have been enough." The court reporter stopped typing. Not because she was told to, because the sentence needed a second of silence after it. Day 4. Teresa Dunlap's testimony arrived. Not a paragraph, not a few sentences. A 4-page contemporaneous record typed on an iPhone, time-stamped to the minute, formatted like a legal memorandum. 8:31 a.m. Captain greets passengers row by row. Handshakes to 1A, white male, 3A, me, 4A/4B, white couple. No greeting to 1C, elderly black male, or 2A, black female. Asks 2A for boarding pass. No other passenger asked. 8:42 a.m. Captain demands government ID from 2A. Passenger complies. Captain tears ID in half, drops pieces on tray table. 8:43 a.m. Direct quotes, "stray dog," "roaches," "trash." 8:44 a.m. Elderly black passenger objects. Captain dismisses him. Flight attendant Colleen witnessed everything, did not intervene. Teresa Dunlap didn't know Iris was FBI. She built that record for a woman, because 20 years in courtrooms taught her, if nobody writes it down, it didn't happen. Day 5. Pastor Elton Graves's statement arrived by certified mail, handwritten, blue ink. It ended with one paragraph that stopped Lorraine cold. I have flown on commercial aircraft since 1969. I have been asked to move seats. I have been searched more times than I can count. But in 57 years of flying, I have never seen a captain destroy a passenger's identification in front of an entire cabin and dare her to speak. This was not security. This was a man telling a black woman she was less than human. I am 72 years old. I don't have many flights left. But I will not be silent about what I saw on Flight 1162. Days 6 through 8. Passenger interviews. 12 first-class passengers. 9 responded. 6 provided written statements confirming Tate demanded only Iris's ID. 4 confirmed the exact phrases. 3 mentioned Colleen's failure to intervene. The man in 1A, the one who got Tate's warmest handshake, wrote one sentence. I saw what happened, and I'm ashamed I didn't speak up. 9 witnesses, 0 contradictions. Day 9. Colleen Moore's interview. Her hands shook around the water glass. She wouldn't look at Lorraine. He told me to keep an eye on her. Did he give a reason? No. Did you ask for one? No. Lorraine walked through the drink delay, the missing towel, the missing nuts. Colleen confirmed all of it, not with excuses, with nods. Then the ID. You saw him tear it in half? Yes. You heard what he said? Yes. What did you do? Her voice cracked. Nothing. I didn't do anything. Lorraine placed the Service Standards Manual on the table. Section 12, highlighted in yellow. This section requires crew members to report conduct violations by any crew member, regardless of rank. Did you report Captain Tate? No. Why not? He's the captain. I didn't think it was my place. Your place is defined right here, in the manual you signed when you were hired. Colleen had no answer, because there wasn't one. Day 10. Bradley Tate. He arrived with a union representative. Gray suit, polished shoes, but the swagger was gone. In its place, something tighter, a man fighting for something he could feel slipping. I want to say, for the record, I've flown 22 years without a single sustained complaint. Lorraine opened a folder. You've had 3 prior complaints alleging discriminatory treatment. 2018, 2020, 2022. Each closed as resolved, no action required. They've been reopened. Tate's jaw locked. His union rep put a hand on the table. Lorraine read his incident report aloud, line by line. Non-compliant? How was she non-compliant? She questioned my authority. She asked why no one else was asked for ID. Is a question non-compliance? No answer. Fraudulent credentials. What was fraudulent? She only had a phone boarding pass. 61% of your passengers use digital passes. Did you flag anyone else? No answer. Combative. How was she combative? She had an attitude. Lorraine placed 6 documents on the table. Gate scan log, Dunlap's record, Graves's statement, 3 passenger statements, the torn ID in its bag. 6 witnesses describe a calm passenger who complied with every request. Your report says combative and fraudulent. Explain the discrepancy. Tate's knuckles were white. I have a responsibility for the safety of every soul on that aircraft. If something doesn't add up, I act. What didn't add up about Miss Fletcher? 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that felt like 50. She just didn't look like a first-class passenger. What does a first-class passenger look like, Captain? He didn't answer. His union rep requested a break. He couldn't say it. Not in a room with a camera and a court reporter. But everyone heard it in the silence. She was black. That was the beginning and end of his security concern. After the break, Lorraine read Derek Simmons's voluntary statement into the record. The locker room comments, the cocktail napkin sneer, the directive to Colleen, the 2-word summary, handled it. Tate's face went flat. He didn't know Simmons had talked. The co-pilot he'd treated like a subordinate for 3 years had chosen loyalty to the truth over loyalty to a man. Day 12. Iris submitted a final written statement. 1 paragraph. I have spent 12 years conducting interviews with individuals suspected of federal crimes. I have been trained in de-escalation, behavioral analysis, and crisis communication. On Flight 1162, I employed all of those skills to remain calm while a man in authority destroyed my property and publicly humiliated me. If compliance, composure, and silence constitute combative behavior, then the word has no meaning. Lorraine added it to the file. Page 46. The most devastating thing in it. Day 14. Skyline Atlantic Internal Affairs Board, Conference Room 2A. And yes, the room number was a coincidence that made Lorraine Voss pause for half a second before she walked in. 4 senior executives, 1 attorney from outside counsel, 1 HR director, 1 aviation regulatory compliance officer, and a file that had grown to 63 pages, 9 witness statements, 1 voluntary co-pilot deposition, 2 crew interviews, 1 false incident report, 1 FBI letter on Department of Justice letterhead, and 2 halves of a Virginia driver's license in a sealed plastic bag. Lorraine presented the findings. It took 40 minutes. Nobody interrupted. When she finished, the board deliberated for less than an hour. The ruling was unanimous. Captain Bradley Tate was found in violation of 4 separate standards. 1. Skyline Atlantic's non-discrimination and passenger dignity policy. He singled out the only black woman in first class for repeated challenges, verbal abuse, and public humiliation without any documented justification. 2. FAA-mandated crew conduct standards. He used his authority as captain to target, intimidate, and degrade a fare-paying passenger in a manner that had nothing to do with aviation safety and everything to do with racial bias. 3. Filing a materially false incident report. He described Iris Fletcher as non-compliant, potentially fraudulent, and combative. Every one of those characterizations was directly contradicted by the gate scan log, the cabin service record, and 6 independent witness statements. A false incident report on a commercial flight is not a paperwork error. It's a federal matter. 4. Destruction of a passenger's government-issued identification. He physically tore a valid Virginia driver's license in half in front of 12 witnesses. There is no Skyline Atlantic policy, FAA regulation, or federal statute that permits a pilot to destroy a passenger's personal property under any circumstance. Termination. Effective immediately. 22 years. 4 commendations. 1 framed photograph in the training center hallway. All of it gone. Ended not by a rival or a scandal or a market downturn, but by a man's own hands tearing apart something that didn't belong to him. Colleen Moore's ruling came next. She was found to have failed her duty under Section 12 of the Service Standards Manual, the same section Lorraine had highlighted in yellow during her interview. She witnessed discriminatory conduct by a senior crew member. She did not intervene. She did not report it. She delayed service to the targeted passenger, and she relayed the captain's instruction to detain Iris at the gate without questioning its basis. 90-day suspension without pay, mandatory completion of a full retraining program covering civil rights compliance, implicit bias, and bystander intervention protocols. Any further violation would result in immediate termination. Colleen accepted the ruling without appeal. She didn't fight it, maybe because she knew she couldn't win, or maybe because somewhere in those 90 days, she'd have to sit with the question that mattered more than any policy manual. Why didn't I say something? The airline referred Tate's case to the FAA for independent review. The false incident report alone was enough to trigger a formal investigation into his fitness to hold a commercial pilot certificate. Mischaracterizing a compliant passenger as combative, claiming fraudulent credentials that were verified at the gate, fabricating a security concern to justify racial targeting. Any one of those would have been serious. Together, they painted a picture of a man who had weaponized his authority and then lied about it in a federally regulated document. Bradley Tate wasn't just losing his job. He was facing the possibility of losing his license to fly. Permanently. But the investigation didn't stop at individuals. It turned inward. Tate's 3 prior complaints, 2018, 2020, 2022, had all been dismissed under the airline's old internal review process. Resolved. No action required. 3 passengers, 3 separate flights. 3 times someone said this man targeted me. And 3 times the system filed it away and moved on. Skyline Atlantic announced a comprehensive reform package. All crew-initiated passenger challenges must now be logged in real time with a documented justification visible to the operations center. No more verbal-only directives. No more keep an eye on her without a paper trail. An independent ombudsman position was created to review all discrimination complaints, outside the chain of command, outside the crew hierarchy, outside the culture of silence that had protected Tate for 2 decades. Implicit bias training became mandatory for every crew member every year. Not optional, not recommended, required. And any complaint involving the destruction or confiscation of passenger property would trigger an automatic investigation. No supervisor discretion, no quiet resolution, no resolved, no action required. CEO Randall Pruitt issued a public statement. The failure on Flight 1162 was not one employee's failure. It was a systemic failure that allowed patterns to persist unchecked. 3 prior complaints told us something was wrong. We didn't listen. We are listening now. Iris Fletcher filed a civil rights complaint with the Department of Transportation. Skyline Atlantic settled for an undisclosed amount and issued a formal written apology to Iris, to Pastor Graves, and to every passenger on Flight 1162 who witnessed what happened and carried it with them off that plane. The settlement included one final provision. Skyline Atlantic would fund an independent annual audit of its discrimination complaint process for 5 years. Not conducted by the airline, not reviewed by the airline. Published publicly. Every year. For anyone to read. And pinned to page 1 of the investigation's final report, Exhibit A, were 2 halves of a Virginia driver's license. The laminate cracked down the middle. The photo split in 2. A small, quiet document that had once meant nothing more than permission to drive a car. It meant something else now. An ID can be replaced. The record of what was done to it cannot. Monday morning, FBI Field Office, Washington, D.C. Iris Fletcher walked through the bullpen at 7:45 a.m. Same blazer, same gold studs, same carry-on rhythm, briefcase in the left hand, coffee in the right. A few agents looked up from their desks. One nodded. Another stopped her in the hallway and shook her hand without saying a word. He didn't need to. She didn't need him to. Nathan Cross was leaning against her office door, arms folded. The look on his face was somewhere between proud and pissed off. Proud of her, pissed at the world that made what she went through possible. "You good?" "I'm good." He slid a new case file across her desk. She opened it before she even sat down. Her eyes were already scanning the first page. "Nathan." "Yeah?" "Thanks for making the call. You would have done it without me. You just would have done it slower." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she was reading again. Back to work. Back to the thing she'd spent 12 years doing. Building cases, stacking evidence, holding systems accountable. That was always the point. Not the badge, not the title. The work. Derek Simmons flew his first flight with a new captain 3 days later. When the plane reached cruising altitude, he unbuckled, stood up, and walked into the first-class cabin himself. He went row by row. Every passenger. Same greeting, same handshake, same eye contact. Every single one. Nobody asked him to do it. It wasn't in his job description. It wasn't mandated by the new policy reforms. He just decided that the next time someone sat in first class on his plane, they'd be seen. Not checked. Not questioned. Seen. It was a small thing, but systems don't change in boardrooms. They change when one person in a cockpit decides to do it differently the next time. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the FBI field office. Handwritten, blue ink, addressed to Special Agent Iris Fletcher. It was from Pastor Elton Graves. "Dear Agent Fletcher, I have waited a very long time to see the system hold a man accountable for what my generation endured in silence. We marched, we sat in, we were hosed and beaten and told to wait. And we waited. For decades we waited. What you did on Flight 1162 was not waiting. It was not marching. It was something new. You sat in that seat, endured what no person should endure, and then used every tool the system gave you to make that system answer for itself. You did not endure in silence. You endured with precision. God bless you, Iris. And God bless the ones coming after you, who will not have to sit in that seat alone." Iris pinned the letter to her office corkboard, right next to her commendation for the Coleman case. 214 exhibits on one side, one handwritten page on the other. Both were evidence. Both proved the same thing. The work matters. So let me ask you something. If you were on that plane, not Iris, not the pastor, not the attorney in 3A, just you, sitting in your seat, watching a man in uniform tear apart a woman's ID and call her trash, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up like Pastor Graves? Would you have pulled out your phone like Teresa Dunlap and started writing everything down? Or would you have looked at your screen, put your headphones in, and told yourself it wasn't your business? There's no wrong answer, but there's an honest one. Drop it in the comments. I want to hear it. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry or uncomfortable or hopeful, or all three at the same time, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who refused to be invisible. Ring that bell, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see the person sitting next to you. Justice doesn't always arrive on time, but sometimes, it arrives in seat 2A.